This keynote panel is Powering the Future. We have a great opportunity to hear about what it's like to administer an energy operation across two different types of parts of the industry. And with us today, are two heads. We have Phil King and David Campbell. So
Phil Wilson.
Phil King's a good guy. Phil Wilson.
Phil King is indeed a good guy. That is where my head is. Phil Wilson, I'm sorry. Good job, Phil. Thanks, David. So we have, there's the bell chiming in. People are bopping in. Looks like there's chairs in the back here, and looks like there's chairs in the back there for y'all. So I'm going to give a quick bio, and then we're going to get right into the Q&A so that we can really get some of their insight for you. So Phil Wilson became LCRA's 11th general manager in February of 2014. He's new on the patrol. We have a opportunity to hear from him. He actually manages and carries out LCRA's board policy work. He manages LCRA's relationship with its customers and stakeholders. Prior to that, Mr. Wilson was the executive director of Texas Department of Transportation. So you have a background now in water, energy, and transportation, quite the extensive background. Wilson currently also serves on the boards of the Large Public Power Council, the Texas Public Power Association, Power Across Texas, Texas Water Conservation Association, and AERO, the Austin Area Research Organization. He also serves on the executive committee of the Austin Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. Our other speaker is David Campbell. He is the president at Hunt Utility Services and president CEO of InfraRight. Prior to joining InfraRight in 2014, he was the president and chief operating officer of Bluescape Resources. I think you may be the only Rhodes Scholar with us today, but that is awesome. I'm glad to hear it. What was your Rhodes Scholar studying?
International relations.
Awesome, very cool. So prior to his work at Bluescape, he was also the chief financial officer of TXU Corporation. And before TXU, he was a principal in the Dallas office of McKinsey & Company, where he led the Texas and Southern region hubs of McKinsey's corporate finance and strategy practice. From 2010 to 2012, David served as a board member for the National Nuclear Accrediting Board and EPRI. Guys, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So I'm going to jump right into it. Let me ask the first question that probably a lot of folks from Texas are curious about. Where do you believe energy prices are going for your respective markets in ERCOT and commodities, and what do you believe it means for the Texas economy? I'm just going to hit you guys with the quick one and see if we can get into a little lightning round here.
Okay, very good. So where are prices going to go? Who knows, of course.
Right.
Though you could argue that we're in the glory days for electric prices, and there are two dynamics at play there. First is natural gas prices continue to be very low. I think their print yesterday in Henry Hub was 280 or 275. So natural gas prices are very low, and that drives wholesale prices in ERCOT. So that's a very powerful dynamic, keeping low prices. And the second is very low interest rates. So with the Fed basically having interest rates near zero, interest costs are very low, and that impacts rates also in the overall economic environment. So with looming environmental rules, with potential volatility in natural gas prices, I don't think anyone would expect that natural gas prices will stay low forever. Hopefully they'll stay low for a while. There could be headwinds in the future on where prices go. But the structural dynamics in terms of an economic climate and a shale revolution that's created a wholesale price environment that's very positive, I think that we have some runway in Texas for ongoing low prices, which I think is a real competitive advantage. If you compare our prices to California's, even now to historically advantaged areas in the Midwest and otherwise with coal prices, with coal units now much more challenged, I think Texas is in a great spot, and I think we have some runway that will continue in that regard.
Yeah.
Prices were negative yesterday, by the way. It was only for a few intervals, but negative electric prices prevailed in the ERCOT market for several intervals yesterday.
Right. Which is a fascinating economic thing if you have negative pricing, and a lot of it's driven because of wind. We have about 12,000 megawatts of wind in Texas right now because we've made an investment in the state in something called CREZ, the Competitive Renewable Energy Zone. When it was started, it might be 2,000 or 3,000 megawatts, we thought. Now it's 12,000, which creates interesting dynamics in the business, both on the transmission and the power generation side. Just to echo what David said, I think that we are in the glory days. I don't see gas prices being sustainable to this degree for lots of reasons. And I'm not sure we know where they're going to go, but I don't think they can get much lower. One, we have the opportunity with LNG exports. I think that's going to take place. People are getting permitted for that, and you look at what's taking place across Europe and Japan. We have a need for natural gas. I think you'll see an uptick in that. Oil prices being depressed have actually created softening for that as well, because a lot of the oil that's being drilled for in the Eagle Ford is condensate, so you get about 80% of that. And if you don't have as much drilling going with oil prices being lower, you're not going to have the same drivers for the gas that's a byproduct of that. I think the challenge that David also alluded to is really where I think part of the market dynamics are going to go. With the environmental rules in play, you have some plants that may be at risk for not being here in the future in the ERCOT market. Gas does set the price as far as our pricing sensitivities are concerned, but if you have coal plants, which are, David, I guess about 40% right now, boilerplate.
40% and falling.
Falling, that's right. The less you have a diversified mix, then the less you can put in the market that way that is a low-cost traditional fuel source. So I think prices have a chance for uptick, but they have been so historically low. And the other challenge to that is you don't necessarily have the incentive to invest in new power. So you've got this weird dichotomy going on when pricing is so low. You've got to get paid back. You have to go to the market, and David also talked about low interest rates. You have to cover your interest costs, your capital costs, the associated in doing that. And that's a concern, I think, to the ERCOT market as a whole. When your pricing are so low, we've showed up the past few years that you may not have the right signal to go make that kind of capital investment you need going forward.
Yeah. And in terms of ERCOT, as far as where you guys see the expansion of renewables on ERCOT vis-a-vis the rest of the generation fleet for the whole state, how much do you think that impacts our state economy? Do you think this expansion in renewables, do you think we'll see a boon in solar that will sort of flesh out some of the generation portfolio that we see in ERCOT today? Or do you envision anything drastically changing in the next year in terms of our generation fleet?
So I'll take a shot at it first.
Sure,
so the nature of our business is that nothing happens overnight. So nothing drastic happens in the generation business. It can't. You can't. It takes a long time to permit. Once you get a permit, you got to design, construct, bring online. So usually it's a matter. It takes years to get things done. So I don't think there'll be radical changes in the next year. I do think we'll see changes over time. In Texas, for those of you who are very interested in the power markets, you'll know this. It's a small subset of us who are really interested in that. We're a strange breed. But the Texas market has undergone some major transformations. If we were sitting here in 1995 or even 2000, we really had two revolutions in our generation fleet. The old gas fleet that was in place, most of that is now retired. There's still a number of units there. They only run in the hot days in the summer. We have almost 30,000 megawatts of new, see, Phil is so excited about this that he's, almost 30,000 megawatts of new gas generation combined cycle units that have come online. That was the first wave, and then we had the 12,000 megawatts of wind. We were nowhere in wind in the early 2000s, and now we're by far the biggest wind generator in the country. So we have had that kind of transformation. We have the newest fleet relative to other states around the country. We don't have as much solar as some other states. You can map directly how much solar is in each state to direct subsidy programs by states. So costs do continue to improve for solar, but without, you can at least, the market has spoken. You see solar where there are big state subsidies for solar, and where there are not, you don't see solar. So we may not see that for a time. We have great potential, but it's not economic today. There is a price consequence. There's many factors that drive California's prices to being almost double ours, but one of them is that they have, the ratepayers subsidize some progressive, some would define progressive generation. So I do think that we'll continue to see renewables penetration over time, but with gas at $3, it's hard to make. You'll find new wind farms being economic, but if we see gas prices rise, I think you'll see an even more fundamental transformation in our generation base, because you'll see a bigger incentive to put in non-gas generation.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I would add a little bit on that is that wind is almost built out. I think you'll see a few more megawatts, but the size of where we are now, I think, is mostly developed. On the solar side, interestingly enough, in the past 6 months, we've seen a dramatic drop in pricing. A couple of reasons that I think the technology's developed much further. The joke we always used to have was solar's been the next big thing since 1975. Well, maybe 1975 finally came in 2015. Because for the longest period of time, the assets just couldn't hold up. We've got companies coming in now who are offering, I think, relatively competitive prices that still are not where gas is. I mean, it's just not there, but at least they're not so far out of the money on a 20-year strip of gas you compare against for net present value, that at least you're in the range to say that could make sense. And they're willing to sign up for a 20-year deal, which is very unique compared to where they used to be, which was, I'll give you 10 years and I can't give you flat. I had some proposals come in last week where they're willing to guarantee a flat price for 20 years. And they're willing to bet on their technology being that much more advanced. So I think there's an opportunity there, but the subsidy question and where the federal tax code goes and how that plays out, you're not getting market dynamics for that. You're getting a subsidy, you're getting a tax benefit, and people are trading those investment tax credits in the marketplace. And so you're really not getting a very fair apples to apples comparison. But I think we'll continue to grow. And the other part is we're having customers on our side who want to have solar as part of their portfolio. So they're asking their provider. We do a lot of co-ops and munis to say, we want to have solar in the mix, even if it perhaps costs a bit more, because they wish to have the social benefit of that.
That's very interesting, isn't it? So you have some local munis that want this for some other benefit than efficiency or optimality of service to their customers, something beyond the public health, welfare, and safety as we've traditionally viewed it?
Absolutely. And we've got a couple of co-ops, for example, that we serve about 1 million Texans in our footprint for energy, who say we want to have solar in our footprint. Now, it's not going to be the big piece of the puzzle, but if they say we want to buy this part of our portfolio and have a slice of that, we're willing to go to the market and see what it prices to, which is why we're doing the exercise, because our customers have asked us to.
Yep.
It's not as competitive price-wise as traditional sourcing, but if the customer asks for that, we're at least going to give them the optionality to say what will it look like and what will it cost in a blended type of rate.
How about the modernizing of our infrastructure? So you had brought up the competitive renewable energy zone, and sort of that's had a market impact. It's also had sort of a cultural impact in Texas. We see a lot of growth in the renewable sector since. What's the state of today's core infrastructure, I guess? And actually, since we have an opportunity, you've dealt in transportation, you've dealt in water, you've dealt in energy. Please share with us what Phil originally first I know, and actually next, but I mean just that coverage is a lot of what we look at today.
So I think the grid is healthy. The electric grid itself. I mean, we make a lot of investments in this state. We keep a very healthy extra capacity in that, and there are days when it's really, really hot, and our biggest risk profiles are days when it's really, really cold. That's when we have the most, I think, risk profile for the grid and where plants are able to operate and show up. But I think the grid, for the most part, is healthy, and the state and ERCOT and companies involved have done, I think, a very good job of modeling what we call congestion and the right amount of investments in the state, and we socialize that cost. It's called a postage stamp rate, where every time we get an electric bill, you'll see there's part of that assigned charge for us to go build new transmission lines. Now, having said that, we need to continue to build. The growth in the state's extraordinary when you have more than 1,000 people a day coming here, and we have to have the transmission and distribution network to address that. On the generation fleet side, I think we've talked about that, some of the challenges we collectively face. I am sensitive, I think, that we have enough in the future, and that we're not getting the right market signals to go invest in that, and there are a lot of ways to kind of skin that cat. On the water side, the problem with water is we don't pay for that as a commodity. And in electricity, for example, on a really, really hot day, and David alluded to the peakers, that's what we call them, when you have to turn power on to show up when it's really hot or cold because you have more demand. There's not a similar signal in water dispatch. You don't get an economic price signal to show up with more water. But the real issue we have in water is not lack of supply, it's lack of transportation. There's not a ERCOT-like system where you can say, I want to move water from point A to point B. And from a public policy standpoint, I think what the legislature could consider in the future is to create an ERCOT-like water pilot program where you would have groundwater and surface water and desal, and you fill in the blank of whatever your supply source is, and run it as a pilot project, especially in Central Texas, where you have the kind of the growth we have. and a lack of rain like you'd have in Dallas-Fort Worth or Houston perhaps, and allow that to work. So there needs to be a conversation on infrastructure for water because it just doesn't exist to the same degree. And we also don't treat it from a regional or statewide standpoint. It's very localized for your local city to be your retail provider, most likely.
Yeah.
So it's a conversation I think we need to have as a state.
Yeah. And David?
Well, I think if 2015 is the new 1975, Phil and I need to work on our haircuts. I think you've got a little more potential, Drew. You
Yeah,
let the
no,
beard,
I think I
it's a
got
little too trimmed, maybe.
Maybe
So I do echo Phil's sentiments that on the power side, our infrastructure is in general in pretty good shape. As I mentioned, relative to many parts of the country, we have a newer generation fleet. We've significantly expanded our capacity in natural gas and in renewables. A near-term scorecard on the infrastructure is congestion, so price differentials across the state. And notwithstanding a very strong growing economy, in general, congestion in Texas is pretty low across ERCOT. Now, we've had pockets in West Texas and South Texas where that hasn't occurred, but the state's done a really good job building out transmission to keep the system-wide prices pretty consistent. If you go up to the Northeast, if you're between Western Pennsylvania and New Jersey, you could have a prevailing price difference of 2 to 3x because you just can't get the transmission built, just the NIMBY resistance. So we have done a nice job on the transmission and generation side. I do have some concern around the potential for our price signals such that we'll get enough generation built. Now, in 2011, we had a really hot summer. We had a couple days where we were tight. It was close.
That's right.
Since then, we haven't had the same kind of phenomenon, even though the economy's been growing and we've had milder summers. I'm probably more in the camp of worrying that price signals are low enough that if we have sustained hot summers a couple years, then it might get a little tight again. So that, I think, is a concern, but now is not the forum of the time to debate capacity markets and other adequate price signals because there has been new generation built. But that would be the only thing I'd cite. But in general, the infrastructure in Texas, I think we've done relatively better than many states. Lagging in solar, arguably, depending on one's point of view, but between pricing, congestion, and age of our fleet, I think we've done pretty well.
The average outage over a year for the residential customer in the state of Connecticut in 2010 was 6 hours, and I think we're somewhere statewide average under 20 minutes, and so I think you're right. I think when we look at sort of the quality and reliability, we are there. But where do we need to improve? Where does InfraRight see its role in expansion of sort of this grid of the future, the powering of the future?
Yep. So, and we're, InfraRead is a company that owns transmission and distribution assets, so we're very focused on the transmission side. I do think that with some of the changes that are coming down the pipeline, particularly with new environmental rules, we're going to see an ongoing, some pressures in our system because the coal fleet in particular is going to be challenged. There's a thicket of rules out there between regional haze and the new carbon rules and cross-state air pollution rule and the mercury rule. The EPA has a number of different rules in flight, so it's hard for generators to predict what's going to happen, hard to make investments. So I think we will see changes happening, and because it takes so long to build out infrastructure, we need to make sure we have a resilient grid that we will be able to accommodate those changes. So I do think we'll need to continue to invest in the grid so that as replacement generation is brought online, it doesn't take that long to permanently build a new gas plant. But if you don't have the transmission, then you're not going to be able to meet the need. So I think we're going to need to continue to invest in our grid because we're going to see a transformation, particularly related to the environmental rules. And as solar prices continue to improve, a lot of that solar resource for Central Station is out in far west Texas. We're going to need to have, it won't be CREZ 2, CREZ is,
Right.
we don't need to repeat that word. Right. If that's a success of the past, we can declare victory in that program. But we're going to need to find make sure that gets to market.
Yep.
So I'd cite if 40% of our generation in terms of production is coal, well, that's going to diminish. And we're going to have to make sure we have the infrastructure to support the new generation that comes online.
Yeah, I think we're having probably 5,000 to 7,000 megawatts that could be no longer producing in the next 5 to 7 years.
Out of a total base of, say, 75, 80,000.
Of the total ERCOT-wide grid.
Yep.
So you're looking at we can call it 10% reduction. And this is base load power to kind of set the table. This is power that runs all the time and keeps your lights on. And that takes a lot of plants. If you have 5,000 to 7,000 megawatts, that's probably going to be 10 to 12 plants that have to be built to replace that. And they don't happen overnight, even natural gas. By the time you get the permitting process, you're looking at another 3 to 5 years minimum to respond. And so that's going to be interesting. The second part is adding on the solar and wind conversation. If you kind of have this perfect world, you say, okay, wind blows at night, solar is in the day. How do you take advantage of CREs you've already built, and you model to that? The other thing that's interesting is in Encore, one of the companies in competition in the state for transmission with us, had a battery idea. And the problem with the battery idea is not the technology per se, that's supposed to be proven out. It's how our market is set up from a regulatory standpoint. If they have the battery technology that captures wind or solar, they can't dispatch that to get paid under the current regulatory scheme. They're not a generator, they're a transmission company which the state regulates from a regulatory and pricing standpoint. So we're gonna have a conversation around, we've made this investment in transmission, you've got this technology that's really cool, and how do you ensure that it can be there in the future and not step in the competitive market in a weird dynamic? And those are all public policy conversations we're going to have.
Yeah.
But we made the investment in the transmission. We could have solar, we may not. It'll happen somehow. And we have wind. But yet you've got this threat profile on the EPA side and environmental activities which are going to take place and has a risk associated with that. So I think the next few years associated with that will be very interesting to see how you deploy that under our regulatory scheme.
I want to ask one more question, then I want to open it up to the audience. We have our microphones back there, and wave the microphone so I see it. Okay. We have the one main one over there. But the next one is, how do you address challenges that you see down the road in 5 to 10 years with respect to federal regulation, with challenges to the existing business models that both of your companies operate in? You know, what are the next things that you see down the road, and sort of what's your feed-forward control for that, rather than waiting for it to happen?
So it's in prior roles, it was directly relevant in working in the generation business. For us, it matters because in the transmission distribution side, we want to try to anticipate what knock-on effects will it have, and how do we help make sure the infrastructure gets built to meet the needs. So understanding, at least having a perspective on, okay, what might happen to the generation fleet and where are new needs going to be. That, I think, is the main impact of federal rules is twofold. One is, are the environmental rules going to be such that we really do potentially see a shutdown of up to 10% of our fleet? Where might new pockets of generation come in place? How do we make sure that there's transmission to support that? That's prong one. And the second prong is, what's federal and state policy going to be with respect to renewables, especially federal policy? We've gotten down to this rhythm of, okay, it's every year that the tax extenders, the tax incentives for solar and wind are renewed. It's not in a long-term infrastructure business, making last-minute decisions to extend something for 1 year is not the way it's not the way to run the railroad. But it's the way we run it in the U.S. So we try to get ahead of, okay, is it likely to continue? I think for us, it's thinking about, okay, how do we help get positioned the infrastructure that we need, given a changing dynamic and imperfect information. And another piece is the market in Texas is so dynamic. 5 years ago, the Eagle Ford and the Permian, they were compared to what they are now, they're nothing. So there's been a massive increase in demand in those areas. A lot of that's latent. A lot of that isn't electrified today. So they're working off of generators. So finding a way to make sure we get the infrastructure to support, even though oil prices are lower, that oil's in the ground, it's going to get produced eventually. We need to respond to a very dynamic economy where the electric grid doesn't always move as quickly as it can, because we can provide them cheaper ways to run their business than they do today off of generators. So it's an exciting time. That's a little more offensive. And with respect to federal policy, you want to try to map out what do you think is coming, and then how do you help build the infrastructure, be flexible and responsive.
Great.
I think that's the key word, is flexibility. And that sounds really intuitive, but it's not. You try to put all your eggs in one basket. You know, we do transmission, we do generation LCRA. On the transmission side, we try to grow the business. You try to be cost competitive. You try to look at markets that are moving. You try to partner and find opportunities where you can respond. David used Eagle Ford Shale. That needs to be electrified. There's a huge demand down there, even with prices moving where they're going. There's a desperate need for transmission in that part of the state. So you're trying to go where the growth is and respond to that. And that is a fairly certain routine because it's a regulatorily focused activity. You can get more predictability around that, which is better. On the generation side, you try to have a diversified fleet. You know, we have solar maybe in the future. We have wind now. We have natural gas, and we have coal. And you try to anticipate the rules you can. For the SO2 and NOx rules, you made the investments. Other companies didn't make those investments. mercury made the investments. But for greenhouse gases, there's no technology to solve for. So you're kind of in a tough spot with that because you already made a certain level of investment, and other companies are doing the very same thing. But I think we're going to have a different market, and you have to be as flexible as you can, understanding that in this industry, 5 years is lightning speed.
Yes.
We are not Apple iPhone speed of light technology. Our
Agile
electrons
approach.
move at speed of light, but we have one product, and that's the same product that it's been out there for 120 years.
Agile systems are not, everywhere in utilities, right? Do we have the microphone here, and I saw some hands raised before, and I knew there was a question.
And these lights are so bright,
Okay.
you get to be anonymous in your questions.
Okay.
That's good, at least from us.
Please.
My name is
Absolutely.
Chuck Drennan. I have kind of a question about, I think the economic model associated with different kinds of generation is different, and I think we're beginning to see some of the effect of that. I think what happens when I invest in a wind farm, I spend an awful lot of money on my initial investment. I buy the windmills. And then my operating costs are much lower over time. I'm not putting any coal in or any gas. Even if it's cheap, I'm still putting expensive gas into that model. So that the model turns out to be different. In other words, I have to pay for the original investment in the wind farm, and then I begin to get to use that wind farm. And, oh, by the way, now my energy costs are much less in that environment, where it's not the same business model in gas or coal. And I guess what my question is how does that impact what's going on? I think it has a lot of impact in the Texas market in that the wind has come into the market and is now part of the market, and part of the reason it works real well is because it's on the low end of its cost cycle.
Yeah, I'll take it real quick. Wind is a great benefit, but it doesn't always show up. So I grew up in West Texas. There are parts of that place I don't recognize now because you couldn't give that dirt away 30 years ago. They've got wind farms and solar farms being talked about. Wind is great, but you need gas or coal or something for baseload power. And so you really have got to have the overlay of that, or you're going to put yourself in a world of hurt really, really fast. And if you're in the high-tech sector here in Austin, Texas, and you're running a wafer fab, you'd like to say you have green power because it sounds cool.
Yeah.
But you better have natural gas and coal to backstop that the whole time. So I think there's some convergence as to that, but it creates a real schizophrenia in the market, because when it blows, it really blows, and when it doesn't, it doesn't, and there's really no in-between. And so we have to make the right investments in baseload generation, ensure that we don't create ourselves uncertainty.
And I think you're right. It's one of the great things about our business. If you like microeconomics, and before you make a generation investment, you look at the overall profile, the upfront capital investment, and the ongoing O&M, there's no doubt wind in effect has a negative variable operating cost because every megawatt hour you generate, you get $30, basically $30 from the federal government. So you bid in your wind asset at negative 30 because you will run that asset and make money at negative prices down to minus 30, which is why we had negative prices prevailing in the ERCOT market yesterday because it's a mild day, not much load, and the wind was blowing. So, but that said, when you factor in capital costs with low natural gas prices and low energy prices, the wind assets don't have a great return in the current market environment. We're still getting some wind built because down by the coast, you have a better load profile that matches peak time, peak pricing. But with low gas prices, ironically, one of the reasons why the growth rate of renewables in Texas it's flattened out, it's not because of transmission constraints. CREZ would support more. It's because natural gas prices are low enough that the all-in economics for wind aren't as good. If gas prices rise, that will impact rates, but it will also create a more favorable environment for wind and solar. So factoring those elements in is important, and I echo Bill's comments. Fuel diversity is very important. If we go all in for gas now, when gas prices rise, and gas prices eventually will rise, they'll cycle, we will regret being just a one-stop shop. And gas does come with renewables. You can't do renewables alone,
Right.
At least not if we want the lights to turn on every time we flip the switch. We need to have base load along with renewables.
Absolutely.
Andrew? Okay, hi, my name is Conrad Oki. I'm from Novatech. It's a substation automation and power measurement company. And your comments about transmission congestion and the delta it causes in pricing, and and the comments about cheap natural gas for the foreseeable future. I'm a big fan of microgrids and the Denmark approach of sort of village-based hybrid generation approaches, and I'm wondering if you could comment on the possibility of that helping to obviate the challenges of the transmission lines, or any policy shifts in that direction.
I haven't been to Denmark before.
I know a little bit. You'll bottom me out fast in the Denmark market. I know that Denmark is very small. It's probably about the population of Dallas-Fort Worth. And they're very high wind penetration. So Denmark has been a very innovative market. They also benefit from a lot of hydro in Norway and Sweden. So they can, as part of how they've been able to, I think their wind penetration is in the 20s, 30s.
Yeah, they had to become a more kind of cellular-based topology because of the variability of the wind, and the hydro does balance it out nicely. But
so I do think, in cellular-based topology, you've already bottomed me out, so I wouldn't be able to. If you gave me the pop quiz on that one, I'll fail miserably. But I do think that we are generating more and more tools that allow distributed generation and distributed management models for the grid to come into play. I think at a very large scale, it's harder to pull off. It's going to take time to get from here to there, but to your point, you're never going to get there unless you start making some progress in those dimensions. Smart meters will help, batteries will help, and some of the innovations in the smart grid allowing less dependence on the overall system will help as well. For now, we are largely dependent on a large integrated system and central generating stations. But over time, there is a lot of potential from distributed generation and distributed grid infrastructure, and we're going to have to. It will take a long time to get from here to there for the whole system, but a lot of those experiments and not experiments to even make it too pejorative. Smaller scale applications are being developed, and there is real promise. Very exciting in that regard, but it won't happen overnight for most of us.
Yes. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Andrew. So, quick question. So we hear about 5 cents a kilowatt hour power purchase agreements for utility scale solar in Texas, getting more and more competitive there. But since it's difficult to get a long-term hedge for gas, and sooner or later it should increase, can you give some insights on what kind of financial models that you run to try to give a fair assessment of the value of the long-term hedge for the solar, since it's flat and actually zero?
Yeah.
You can't. How long can you go out on gas contracts to economically hedge? Is it 7 years? And then, so how valuable is that 20-year hedge? And do you use Black-Scholes, or what kind of financial model to try to assess that?
Well, you've got one of the premier experts on gas hedging to our left in the United States. So I'll be the amateur hour first, and then let David go, because he really is extraordinary at this and done a tremendous job in lots of environments. In our case, we're looking at best price offers right now in solar, and I'm using a 20-year strip. I know what it costs out there, which is going to be about $4.30 right now for 20-year out. I'm not going to ever buy a 20-year hedge. That's cost prohibitive. It would blow my balance sheet up. But at least I have something you can have a comparator to say, on the NPV side, if solar is X, can I be NPV positive, because they're promising a 20-year PPA. So I'm trying to find some kind of apples to apples comparison on that to say, this is what it costs for 20-year strip for gas, this is what it costs for a 20-year solar play, and if gas stays above that level, then I'm going to be NPV positive. And so it's really simple when it comes to that part. We typically, on the other side, are not going to hedge our gas out probably more than 12 to 18 months, because your insurance, as I call it, that is too expensive. So I'm going to go out for a year, and I'll probably buy 60 to 80% of what the market shows for the year. And in the out months, that next quarter to 6 months, I may do 30 to 50. Because I'm trying to buy certainty around the pricing to that as best I can. But also, as David alluded to, we had so much volatility and fluctuation that you're trying to get the pricing you can as you tell your customers, I'm going to sell you power for this price. And on the fuel side, that's half your variable cost. You're trying to address that. So you say you've covered your half of your half.
So my knowledge is a little bit dated on it. Right now I'm focused on the transmission space, where it's a different dynamic. We're not contracting for generation. Really focused, trying to understand, well, we want to understand those dynamics because we want to help build the infrastructure that will support it. It is a very hard, my experience is primarily in competitive markets. Phil's is with LCRA, where it's you're operating in competitive markets and also operating with munis and co-ops as customers.
But we've
for
been in the
more
market
long-dated
for the QSE, right?
So you see both. I've been primarily in the competitive market. It's hard to have those long-term deals in place. Most customers won't sign up for those deals. They're very credit intensive, very expensive in terms of credit. So you end up layering on costs when there's uncertainty on, you can't get a quote on a liquid market price for power out a couple of years. It's just hard to do. The market doesn't have that depth. And it won't when there's this much uncertainty around environmental rules and other factors that will drive pricing. So will the solar subsidy be in place? Will the wind subsidy be in place? What environmental rules will drive? What will that do to the coal infrastructure? Can't get a natural gas contract for too long. You might try to actually buy a field and get a synthetic natural gas price that you can control your factor costs, but there are too many other dynamics. So it's hard to get those long-term agreements in place in a commercial marketplace. It's not just betting on the technology of solar. There's a lot of other factors at play. So most of the long-term agreements around the country are with regulated utilities that can have the certainty of being able to pass it on in rates. And of course, in Texas, the regulated entities don't play only a narrow role in the process. They don't contract for long-term generation. So with the amount of uncertainty in the market today, I don't think it'll be the prevailing model. But there's a number of large customers, Phil commented on it, who still will contract for solar and renewables. And with the pricing where it's going, you'll still see it, but it's hard to get those long-term agreements in the commercial marketplace.
I have to sneak in a quick question. Where is the best barbecue in Texas?
You know, that's like fighting words.
Right?
So I'll
So,
defer.
so I don't want to get you
No,
guys in a sparring contest, but
Well,
I'm just curious.
I'll argue for one of the communities that we serve. That's Lockhart.
Yes.
You go about 30 minutes south of here, and they've got like 5 choices.
Yeah, Lockhart.
So if you just have a chance to go somewhere and you want to hit like the smorgasbord,
Right.
a barbecue, go to Lockhart, drive down there, spend an hour and a half, and make yourself violently ill.
David, got a vote?
I support Phil 100%.
Yeah.
He's wearing boots that say "Don't mess with Texas." He's grew up in West Texas. I'm a corporate guy who does wholesale stuff. I'm not even going to touch it.
What's your favorite barbecue? Tough. Getting you on the spot. Can't hide from this audience.
I got to vote for Dallas Fort Worth. Nobody,
Okay,
we don't score first on any poll, so therefore
Yeah.
I'm going to be parochial and cheer
Okay.
for my local
Good
market.
for you. Good for you. Good for you.
Now the Austin barbecue is hard to beat.
Yeah,
Austin's
no.
the best barbecue.
I might go with Phil on Lockhart, though, to be honest. I've been to all three. We have time for one more question, and then it's time for our own little lunch. Anyone else? Yes.
So I think next time we need to lead with the barbecue discussion, so there's ample time for that. Thanks to the three of you for the discussion here. Mr. Wilson, on the LCRA website, it talks about the drought that's affecting the entire lower Colorado River Basin. Reservoirs are floating just above 30% of their capacity. I apologize if I missed a detail or misunderstood, but it sounds like the assertion was made that there's plenty of water out there. There's just a lack of infrastructure. Can you expand on that notion just a little farther?
Sure. So from a macro standpoint, Texas has enough water. It's getting it from point A to point B, which is a transportation logistics issue. And that could be water from East Texas to Austin. That could be groundwater that's moved. That could be new reservoir development. There's a whole host of ways to get the supply we have if we ever had to get there. The second part on LCRA standpoint is that we are in a drought, but we also have enough water we need for the future. We have several years of capacity because the reservoirs have done what they're supposed to do. When it's rained, we've captured that water, we've held that water. We've had aggressive conservation efforts the past several years. Mm-hmm. Austin today in 2015 is using less water than it did in 1999. And look at the population growth we've had here. So we could go without rain for several years, and we'd be okay because that water supply is secure in the Highland Lakes. Now, having said that, we want to have rain. We need the inflows to take place because of rain, and this drought is very significant, which means we have to be good stewards all the time. We can't stop doing what we've been doing from a conservation standpoint. So we do have water supply for the state. There's ways in the future to get there if we have transportation and technology delivered if we need it. The water supply here is secure. The lakes have worked the way they're supposed to work. And hopefully we'll have a nice tsunami and double El Nino, whatever that means, sometime in the near future, and the lakes will be full. And so we had a good wet weekend. added several thousand acre feet. We need more of that.
Thank you.
I will say that since Phil's been head of LCRA, we've had a lot of rain.
The rainmaker.
Causation, correlation, I don't know, but the facts are there.
They are
That's
there.
a friend right there. Thank you all very much.
Everyone, thank you. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, David.